I just want to welcome you to Future for Families interview with Lance Hesketh from England. Lance and I met in 1999 as the world was turning over to millennium, that everything was going to go crashing down, the whole world was going to become into chaos, and we saw it happen together. In fact, I think we played video games the whole New Year's Eve night.
I forgot about that as well. Yeah.
So, and the world had come crashing down, and we were able to. I was able to tell our friends from the U.S. hours ahead of time that we survived. So, but in that we've been separated for quite some time, and I just wanted to take the time to introduce you, Lance, to our families here and to those who are part of our Future for Families group, and just let you introduce yourself a little bit, just so that families can know who you are and what you do.
Okay, so you want me to, when you say what I do, business or ministry?
A little bit of both, because our lives are kind of intertwined.
Sure. Okay, so you know my name, Mike's introduced me. I'm married to Kerry. We've got 3 children who are 21, or turning 21. Who's Emma. Daniel is just turned 18, and Aaron's 15. We've got a little foster boy who lives with us as well, who is 14. So we live on the coast of England, a place called Bournemouth. Currently, I am involved with a business, which is what you describe as a business as mission. We're just busy launching. One of the functions we want to do is provide services to the churches, that guys in the churches aren't spending too much time with their kind of websites and live streaming and social media and all those kind of things. A lot of the churches in England haven't got the people usually to help them with that. So we offer the service that we can take all of that off them. We can manage that for them. We're just getting the Church of England here, which is kind of the biggest church organisation in the UK. And it's kind of recognised as the church in England, hence the name. So that's a great client. We're busy working with some of the main bishops and deacons, trying to get that through, because there's a lot of red tape to go through in England, especially with these kind of organisations. As well as that, we, as a family, we buy end-of-line products from businesses, and we then sell them or export them, or over different platforms. Obviously, things like Amazon and eBay and other platforms such as that. And we will sometimes supply other families who, or other businesses rather, who would like to wholesale and things like that. So that's the kind of main things from a business point of view. We're involved with some other new projects, but they're at very early stage at the moment. I can fill you in at a later date about that. I think
it's very entrepreneurial.
Yeah. I've always been, I think from the age of, from about 22, 23 years old, I've been my own boss. And from a ministry point of view, we're currently in one of the vineyard churches in England. We lead a kind of life group. We're quite involved with mentoring kind of young adults. We're about to start a discipleship. We don't really want to call it a course, but some kind of facility which disciples people well as a couple of times a month, we're going to run prophetic rooms here in the UK. So we're kind of involved with all those things. And obviously the business side of things we're involved with is very much about the kingdom as well, advancing the kingdom. We're really wanting to help businesses really get their staff evangelizing, advancing the kingdom in the workplace. So that's kind of
very good. Well, I'm going to also fill them in a little bit.
Sure.
Church that we went to in South Africa after we left, my wife and I left, Lance and Carrie became pastors there and helped bring it back up. And so they've had a heart for ministry, a heart for families. And when we were talking before this, Lance was talking about Carrie and Emma, his oldest daughter, and their heart to help children. And what's that called? Their child services, child protection.
Yeah, well, it's called social services. So Emma's just qualified or process of just finishing being a qualified social worker, but she wants to specialise in child protection. And Kerry's helping the local government, which you call the kind of town hall, local council, present courses, because we're involved with fostering.
So I wanted to really give that introduction so that our audience could see the depth and the breadth of where your heart is and where you're speaking from when I ask some different questions of you. And some of the questions I'm about to ask you don't know. I didn't prep you with, but sometimes I like to visit beforehand and kind of get your heart and where you're at. So, Lance, one of the things that we had talked about and you mentioned briefly was discipleship of young people. And my first question is just in brief, across the pond where you are, in the motherland or fatherland, whatever you want to call it, that in the UK and in Europe as a whole, where do you feel like the next generation is? Like, where are they? If you just had to say you weren't going to do anything for them, where would they be? The next generation as parents coming up, where would the country be if the church did not do anything?
Oh, well, even with the church functioning in England, the next generation, when you say next generation, Mike, what age group are you
I'm talking about your kids,
right.
Emma, Daniel.
Okay, so next generation, yeah, got you. So, they're lost. I mean, really lost. There's a very small percentage of next generation who are actively involved pursuing God in local churches. Yeah, sad to say.
I was just in Ireland this past summer, and very much the same thing. Really old churches.
Yeah.
And the same way when I travel to the Virgin Islands, the U.S. Virgin Islands, it's a similar situation and that's why they brought me in, was to kind of help them. What should we do to reach the next generation? And so that leads me to my next question for you. With that in mind, and you being a father of that generation, what would you say as far as discipleship, when you think of discipleship and you're thinking of what to do in that, what does discipleship mean to you?
Okay, so I think discipleship to me is teaching that generation. We're talking about that generation, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Teaching that generation what it really is to be not just following Jesus, but actively pursuing him and pursuing God's will for their lives and where he's put them. And we start off, well, I found the most effective way to start the process is to start with the whole who they are in Christ.
Yeah.
And the whole identification of the fact that they are a son and a daughter of God.
We do that. I just have to say, you don't know this. We didn't talk about this before, but our church, Unified City Church, that is the foundation of what we do. We have a sons and daughters class. That's our introductory class.
Well, we've worked with a lot of young adults in England who are in a really bad spiritual place, and I could tell you some terrible stories of what they're involved with and what they've been planning to do, and they have had numerous encounters with church leaders here, and they've usually kind of ended up with us because, well, I think the Lord just led them to us. And when they have had a revelation that they're really a son of God or a daughter of God, that's really a total turnaround point. That's why for us as well, it's the foundational, everything comes from there. I try and get all their thinking to, would you as a son of God, do you think your Father in heaven would want you to think about this situation like that, considering who you are and where you're seated?
Yeah. So how do you approach that with, do you find, let me put it this way, do you find that many of the young people that you talk to are disenchanted with church and hurt, or just totally unaware of the role of that church is supposed to play, or that Christ is supposed to play in their life?
Yeah, church in England has kind of gone from a central part of the culture and the country historically, and is now kind of looked at by that generation as kind of a historic thing which has got really no relevance to them. And the same old scenario of, it's something for old or boring people. So it's really not viewed as something fun. It's not an adventure. There's nothing. And a lot of the churches here are really quite religious and full of old boring characters who you can understand why the children just can't see any kind of relevance to them.
Yeah.
So although, don't get me wrong, there is great churches scattered all over England who are really having, like the church I'm in, we're seeing, the kind of university students they do great outreach in the town. When the nightclub's empty, they're handing out bottles of water to the students who have drunk too much, and they're handing out slippers for the girls in uncomfortable high heels, and they're there doing it. So there is some great churches doing it, but there's a lot not.
So with that thought process in mind, of that the church has become basically irrelevant, or what they perceive as irrelevant to modern day life.
A lot have, yeah.
Yeah. How is your experience in life, your experience in business, and your business as a mission, how is that something that you see could go hand in hand with helping young people see that church is more than just becoming a priest or becoming a pastor or becoming some kind of, holy person that doesn't do anything for the world, or that's in the world but can't be part of it? How do you address that? Is that something that you see as something that can help them see that church is supposed to be effective, even though we're not?
Kind of nutshell the question a bit more, Mike.
Okay, so you are, because of your own business, and I'm leading you into this because what I've seen is in my life when I felt the call to ministry.
Yeah.
I thought it had to be like one of three things. You know what I'm saying? An evangelist, a pastor,
right,
or something in that realm of active ministry. So I think that kind of got our generation off course, because your relationship with Christ is not about your position in the church. Yes. It's about who you are as a son or daughter. And son or daughter can be anything. And I relate to my kids all the time. I say, as a father, I want them to pursue their heart, whatever it is. And I'm going to give them everything I can to help them achieve their dream.
Yes.
How do you, that's something I don't want to do myself.
Yeah, so, I suppose how I'd relate to that, or how I'd respond to that, is by saying that I think for a long time, we call it here like a sausage factory. that the generations prior to this generation now, it was a case of you got into the church, everybody wants to be like the senior pastor, and everything seems to have been funneled to produce little mini pastors everywhere,
Yep.
But I come at it from a completely different scenario now, with certainly with that generation, that every single one of them has an individual calling, obviously back again to the identity. What is it that God's deposited in you when you were being knitted together in your mother's womb? What gifts did he assign to you that he did intentionally, because you have a unique calling, a unique plan and purpose? And so for me, I love to be involved, helping them identify what their gifts are, because a lot of them don't have a clue.
Yep.
A lot of them don't even know they had gifts, to be honest with you. So the lights start coming on when they say, yeah, actually, I'm amazingly good at this, this, and this. And then looking at what God's used them for in the past, what have they got a heart for, like you say, kind of correlating the gifting, what they've got a heart for, bringing the whole thing together. And then the lights start coming on. And I drum into them all, rightly or wrongly, right? That God, it's not about religion. In fact, I've started saying I don't like religion. It's all about relationship. Everything comes down to your relationship with God. He's not interested in your church attendance. When I say that, of course, it's great to be in local community, involved with the local church. Of course it is. But God's primary, number one on the list, focal point, I'm convinced, is an intimate relationship with us individually.
Yeah.
And so I focus at trying to help them develop an intimate relationship with their Father through that, and the revelation of their identity in that, helping them understand their gifting. And then once they've kind of got that part of the jigsaw together, it starts to become more clear and apparent what they feel called to start doing. Because obviously you and I both know you can start off being called into this, and that could just be a stepping stone to the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. But the key thing is you've got to start getting on the step, you've got to step onto the stepping stone. And we spend a lot of time as well. We do, Kerry and I, when we're mentoring young people, is really helping them identify the Lord's voice. Because at the end of the day, we always say to them, it doesn't matter what my opinion is. It really doesn't matter what your opinion is. What matters is what's God saying in the situation. And that we really try. I really try. And I think if I put more energy into equipping people to hear God's voice, I think, than a lot of the other things we do,
So, in relation to, I know that you and I are both loving fathers. We love our kids. We're proud of our kids. I'm operating under the presumption that you, like me, often use your family as guinea pigs for whatever message you're going to be teaching, whatever discipleship direction you're going to be going. So I'm often doing my family devotions in the morning. It's what I'm going to be sharing with the kids for my daily power session, or it's what we're going to be doing with the youth. So in that discipleship part of it and hearing God's voice, is that something you did with your own kids, you and Carrie? And how do you take from helping others? Sometimes it's easier. I will just say this. It's easier as parents to be able to do it for somebody else, but then it's kind of like when we get to our own kids, some parents have a really hard time doing and being that for their kids. How do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, well, I've been so guilty of that myself. I've spent sometimes so much time with other young adults with problems, because you kind of think, well, your kids are okay. They know what's right. They know what's wrong. They know God's voice. They know these things. But we try and be really practical with our children. So we take whatever situation they're dealing with in their lives, and we just try and keep bringing it back to God. What's his character and what's he saying in the scenario? And rather than kind of creating scenarios which aren't that relevant to them. We try and, whether it's been bullying, dealing with bullying at school, whether it's dealing with something going on in the sports team they're involved with, or girlfriends or boyfriends, or how do you think God, instead of telling them they can't do all these things, what do you think God's perspective on these things is? We try and keep bringing it back to God, that at the end of the day, God's always going to be there, but your mum and dad aren't,
Yeah.
So we really want them to be, and we really try and everything so that they come to a place where they're completely reliant on God first, because it's really easy for kids to become completely reliant on the parents. That's natural and easy. Well, for some children it is. But we keep trying to, like we do when we're mentoring, because when you're mentoring people and they're getting breakthroughs, it's easy for them to start putting you on a bit of a pedestal and think all your advice is great. Well, we say it's not. Everything God says is great. So I suppose I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of practically what we do. We try and bring everything back to just practically how God works in these situations.
Yeah. Well, and that leads me to kind of my final thought for today. But I love your heart. I love where you're at and the direction you're going. Of course, they don't know, but you and Carrie and I and Nicole hit it off very, very well in South Africa. Some of our best friends. Yeah. To this day, even though we don't get to see you, this is the first time I've seen you face to face, even over the computer, for like 20 years.
It's crazy.
So, but I've always been, just intrigued with your passion and drive and ability to step out. And when nobody else, to step out on the water. To me, I look at you as a Peter kind of a guy, where it's like, it doesn't matter if anybody else is stepping out of the boat. If God says go, if God says come, I'm coming. And so in that realm, there's been a lot of things, a lot of decisions over the last 22 years of your marriage. Yeah, loads. That you probably question, that Carrie probably has questioned. But in the end, right now that you are in the place God wants you to be. You're doing what you want to be doing, what God wants you to be doing. And so with that idea of hearing God's heart, what would you, or hearing what God's direction and hearing his voice, in a nutshell, the last thing of this thing is, with that, what would you say? How do you know, or how are you led by God? What would you say is how you personally have felt over the last 22, 23, 24 years that you've felt God's leading in your life?
Okay, so that's hard, but I'll try and do it quick, right? So I think the main, one of my favorite stories is with King Solomon, and it kind of comes, for me, all comes down to this type of thing, right? God appeared to Solomon in a dream, and he said to Solomon, ask me of anything, I'll give it to you. Okay, I'm paraphrasing a bit, right? So King Solomon came back to him and asked for, we all say he asked for wisdom. I think if you translate it accurately, it's actually a hearing heart, right? And to understand God's wills and God's purposes in every situation, okay? God was so delighted with Solomon's request. You know the story, right? He said, great. He says, you're going to have that, and nothing else will you lack. Everything. And we see in Solomon's life, right? We know at the end he made some daft decisions, but we see when he was on that track, Queen Bathsheba traveled halfway around wherever she came from the world to see this. I mean, she was a seriously wealthy woman, right? Yeah. And successful in her own right. To see King Solomon and ask him, what is he doing, And it all came down to King Solomon's heart for wanting to know God's will in every situation, right? And if I could kind of deposit that in anybody, one thing in anybody would be that I can I can I can stand on whatever I need to stand on to make the point that there's nothing more valuable that I can think of than knowing God's heart and voice for every situation. And the cool thing, Mike, is God wants you to know his will in the situation he's put you in. Mm-hmm. So it's not like it's this big, hard thing to work out.
Yeah, he's not trying to hide and seek from you.
It's not rocket science. And the more mature Christians I speak to, how they struggle with hearing God's voice, but little children hear his voice because they haven't got all the junk. You know, so I think that if I had to say the number one key to success that I've experienced at times in my life, great success, and I've also had great times of trials, right? But the most successful and most breakthrough points in my life have been where we've taken the time to seek out God before we step forward into it and ask him, is this the right direction? Sometimes we just have a peace to move forward. We've prayed, we've petitioned God. And often, sometimes God's told us, wait, or I want you to go this way and start this or do this, but not to move forward without knowing it's God. The times I've done that, I felt like I've been walking in treacle, and I almost feel God's called me back and said, you've run ahead of me. When it's in God's timing and you've heard from him, and you don't have to, and the lovely thing, because he's a loving father, is he's not waiting for you to make a mistake and then punish you. If he knows your hearts to hear him and seek him, like with Solomon, right?
Yep.
And he was so blessed by Solomon's request. God, that's our Father. So when we've done everything we can do to hear from God and we start doing it, even if we've made a mistake, the promise is in Romans 8:28, as you well know, that all things work together for good for those who love him, are called according to his plans and purposes. So that's a promise to us.
Yeah.
So yeah, hearing from God and just taking that time, just because we can be impatient, just taking that time, because when it's in God's timing, it just works 1,000 times better than your own timing.
Well, I appreciate it, Lance, for coming on and sharing with us. And one of the things that I shared with you as far as my heart to help families understand finances is that financial issues are between 40 and 50% of all divorces.
Yeah.
And so that's another thing I want to discuss sometimes, have Nicole and I and you and Carrie on together and just talk about 20-something years of marriage. Both of us as couples are right neck and neck in that. And how we, you often said when hearing God, you said we, not I. You said we, which I knew it was you and Carrie, that Absolutely. Everything you've done as a man is always in prayer and in unison with your wife.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Yeah, so I really feel like Future for Families, that's another little visit that we need to have with, where we can talk about how to overcome those mistakes.
Yeah, that is key, because we're one flesh now. So if one of us hasn't got a piece or a niggle with that, I will hold fire until I know that we either change it, don't do it, or we've got a piece together. Absolutely, that's so important.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna thank you so much, but if that would be okay, I would love to have a couple more discussions with you about a couple more things.
Yeah.
Over time. So number one would be, of course, this is Future for Families, and families are reliant upon a good image of a father.
Yeah, that's
one thing, and a good image of a marriage. And because, like you said, understanding in discipleship their identity and understanding the heart of the father. But that's one thing I've ran into is a lot of young people and even older people I've counseled have a misperception and a bad image of an earthly father, which totally distorts their image of their heavenly father.
Yeah,
so they really don't know how to grasp it.
No.
When you're talking church speak and you talk about the father, it freaks them out.
Yeah, well, they can't get their head around it, because they haven't had that played out for them.
Yep. Well, thank you again. Thank you so much, and I look forward to future conversations. God bless you all for listening, and we will get back to the other side of the pond another day. Like this video if you enjoyed it.